All right. Well, I like history. I hope y'all like history. This guy says there's a hole in it. Now, if you know anything else about me, it's that I also like holes. I'm a certified drill specialist. I specialize in the drilling and excavation of all holes. So, let's see if this guy knows anything about drills or if he just eats oak trees.
You here. If you've ever found yourself flipping furniture as you search frantically for your car keys, you'll know how easy it is to misplace something.
Yep.
Maybe you lost your phone, your wallet, or the will to live.
All of
But
those.
of all these,
Holy
the
shit.
biggest mystery is how we lost 1 billion years of history. This is far more serious than when you found your keys in the bread bin, because there's a colossal blank spot in our planet's past, and nobody's quite sure where we put it. To put things into perspective, 1 billion years is almost a quarter of Earth's existence, and yet there's a 1 billion year gap in the fossil record that geologists call the Great Unconformity. Let's dig a little deeper, shall we? Speaking of which, if you ran outside right now and started to dig, you'd uncover older layers of rock the deeper you got. First, you'd find an Alanis Morissette tape from the 90s, maybe a disco ball from the 70s. But eventually, you'd excavate some Roman coins and other assorted artifacts.
I don't think I would.
Why is it that both human and natural remains sink deeper into the Earth as time passes? Well, the Earth's surface is constantly being littered with fine particles like sand and dust. This sediment accumulates in an agonizingly slow process called deposition. Then, in another process called cementation, these mineral particles gradually bind together until a few million years later, and sedimentary rock is formed. Then another layer of rock forms on top of that, then another, and so on, until the ground beneath your feet is like a trifle. A rock trifle,
plane.
with millions of layers made over millions of years. And not a single one of them contains custard. What a tragedy. But
Custard.
during all this
Ground custard would be good.
cementation, animals are doing their usual party trick of dying. All the soft squidgy bits get eaten or decompose, but sometimes the harder bits, like bones, shell and husk, get covered in dust, slowly succumbing to the sedimentation, thus becoming encased in rock. Over time, water penetrates this rocky tomb, which dissolves the biological remains within. Eventually, minerals fill that void and form a fossil, which of course is just a rock replica of the creature that once resided there. Importantly though, that fossil is frozen in time, enshrined in the sedimentary rock from the era in which the animal lived. Much of our understanding of the history of the planet and life itself has come through studying the sequence of sedimentary rock layers and the treasures they've trapped through time. Often the different layers, called strata, are clear and distinct, with each revealing something unique about the age it was formed in. The stupendously fun pastime of studying strata is called stratigraphy, and one of its guiding principles is the law of superposition, which states that, if undisturbed, the lower down the rock layer, the older the rock. Not exactly rocket science, but it does mean that generally when you're looking at a cross-section of geologic formations, you get a fairly neat picture of the passage of time. But unfortunately, history isn't so predictable. Whilst new layers of sedimentary rock are being formed in one location, in another, conditions can change, and sedimentation just stops. Wind and water erosion can move particles elsewhere, effectively deleting part of a geologic record. After a while, sedimentation might resume in that location, but these temporary interruptions will forever leave a gap in that rock's record, and sometimes that gap, called a hiatus, can be millions of years long. It's like hitting pause, rewind, and then record again whilst in a very long conversation. In the final recording, there will be missing parts that are irrecoverable, and if these parts are integral to the meaning of said conversation, then the whole thing will no longer make any sense. When these hiatuses happen, it creates a noticeable difference in the angle, colour and texture of the new rock that sits on top, as can be seen here and here. Geologists call this feature an unconformity. It was Danish man Niels Steensen, considered the father of stratigraphy, who first sketched an unconformity back in 1669. But it was a Scottish...
So unconformity is like when shifted layers of rock display different time periods, or are missing time periods, or have opposing time periods that contrast with one another in the overall timeline, I believe.
Farmer called James Hutton, who discovered the first significant unconformity.
It's always a farmer.
Whilst walking near Siccar Point in Scotland in 1787, he noticed a striking difference between the lower and upper rock formations, and so he coined a name for it, Hutton's unconformity. If that name sounds a little rude to you, but you're not really sure why, join the club. Anyway, the greyish lower layer of rock is made up of deep sea deposits from around 425 million.
I just think like something like this, just to like see that, would be so cool. That was my favorite thing about going when I went west to the West Coast, driving through the like mountain regions, and like how some of the roads would cut like through smaller hills and stuff like that, instead of going over them. Instead of like going like steep as fuck and then steep as fuck back down, it would just go through. And some of the rock layers that you could see exposed and like the carved out hills were so awesome. Like honestly, that shit's so cool to me. Like call me a nerd, whatever you want, but this is really interesting to me. Went from rock to rock, huh? Yeah, you know what it is. But like, I don't know, I just love the differing like colors and like rock compositions and stuff like this when they like come together. Like that's so cool.
Million years ago. But the reddish upper layer was deposited by rivers and streams about 345 million years ago. That's a hiatus of about 80 million years. It was on the back of this discovery that Hutton helped develop some major theories about the movement of tectonic plates and the forces that shape the face of the Earth. Some geologists call Siccar Point a geologic shrine, which tells you how incredibly strange both this formation and geologists actually are. However, the most unusual unconformity was found in 1869, when John Wesley Powell was observing a strange mound. Whilst traversing the Grand Canyon, he noticed a vertical rock formation butting up against horizontal formations. Channeling the supreme creativity of his geologist predecessors, he named it Powell's Unconformity. But since then, it's been more commonly referred to as Powell's Great Unconformity. And there are two striking reasons why it's deserving of a great. Firstly, the unconformity actually spans an entire continent, stretching across Laurentia, which is the name for the ancient heart of North America. Secondly, many other unconformities had been unearthed around the world at this point, but they mostly represented small gaps, on a planetary scale at least, maybe tens of millions of years. But the smallest time gap between the two rock layers in the Great Unconformity is a modest 250 million years. And the biggest is over 1.2 billion years. That's right, that missing piece of prehistoric pie sandwiched between these two unassuming rock formations represents up to 1.2 billion years of missing history.
So, if there's anything I know about rocks, and there's anything I know about history and science, I would assume that this time period, right? This time period where we're missing was extremely lush, and most of the earth was covered in a very high level of vegetation and organic materials. because it would make sense for those organic materials and vegetation to get washed away easier than if it was like packed in between all the sediment, like normal erosion processes would wash that through, or it's a period of such a lack of vegetation and organic material that it is just a large chunk of what's mostly dust that was able to easily erode over periods of time instead of being held together by the roots and or substructures of the plants and organic material in a lush environment. So it's got to be either or. I'm theorizing right now that this would be either extremely lush environment time period or extremely like decayed and barren time period.
We have no idea where it went. But there's so much more to this rocky weirdness. Since Powell's grand discovery, a few more formations have been found all over the world that have the same time period plucked from their record. Together, we collectively refer to these as the Great Unconformity. It's a mystery that spans the entire planet and over 1 billion years of missing knowledge. Take the Grand Canyon example. Here, the 525 million year old Cambrian era Tapiat sandstone sits snugly on top of the 1.7 billion year old Vishnu basement rocks, dating back to the Precambrian era. Like I said, a time gap of 1.2 billion years. Weird, right? Scuttle over to the Ozark Plateau in Missouri, where we see a similar sight. 500 million year old sandstone sits suspiciously atop 1.4 billion year old granite, representing a 900 million year hiatus. For the sake of all that is igneous, what's the metamorphic heck is going on here? Well, some have suggested a theory to explain the Great Unconformity, and it's called the Snowball Earth theory. It refers to a time during the Cryogenian period, around 650 million years ago, when the Earth's surface was thought to be covered by glaciers and ice sheets, like a giant snowball. Glaciers are capable of causing erosion on a massive scale as they grind across landscapes, and it's been estimated that they collectively removed 2 to 3 miles from the Earth's surface. Basically, the Earth had its face exfoliated. Now, do you remember me saying that the younger rocks that sit atop the Great Unconformity all around the world date back to a period called the Cambrian period? Well, what's really interesting here is that the Cambrian period was when the biggest explosion of life in our planet's history took place.
So I didn't guess if this is the most prevalent theory. I got close to it. I didn't guess snow, but I did say barren. And if it was covered in ice and snow and stuff, then the world was much more barren of organic biomass. So I'm right.
During a tiny timeline of only 11 million years between approximately 541 and 530 million years ago, the original ancestors of almost all the life forms we currently know today sprang into existence. For example, this is when fish first appeared. There was life before this event, sure, but this short window was when Mother Nature downed a Red Bull, snorted some cocaine, and hit the big evolutionary boost button.
I like this guy.
So how does all this relate to the Snowball Earth theory? Well, when all these ice flows started to hit the ocean, they deposited gargantuan quantities of nutrient-rich minerals into the water, where, the theory goes, it was responsible for the aforementioned explosion of life. Over 1 billion years of sedimentary rock was just carved from the face of the planet by glaciers, then plunged into evolution's breeding ground, the ocean, where the many minerals contained within acted as a catalyst for life as we know it today. So, in the end, it looks like we did lose 1 billion years of history down the back of the sofa, only the sofa in question turns out to be the bottom of the ocean. But Snowball Earth remains a theory, one that was only posed as recently as 1998 by Dr. Paul Hoffman. And if you ask me,
That was when the plane came back.
Decades doesn't seem like enough time to definitively explain a billion years of missing history. Maybe someday new techniques or technologies will rock the geology world and enable us to fill in more of the missing gaps in our planet's very long, very empty history book. But until then, the great unconformity will remain a great mystery.
So the reason we don't have it is the reason we have anything. Other factors can occur. The Earth is bombarded with space debris, solar winds, and other things that can affect how much cosmic dust hits Earth. True, correct, and factual. So the summary here is like our primary resting theory is that some like ice age on crack shit scraped the Earth's surface, took away a bunch of rocks, erased history, put all those minerals into the ocean, where they were a catalyst for the expansion and evolution of life from there on and therein without. And then we got fish, and then fish said, I don't want to be wet anymore, and we got other creatures, and now we have us. That's cool. I think that's a very interesting thing to know about the world, is that we literally have a cross-planet 1.2 billion year time gap in our geological history and our understanding of that. And it makes sense too, because North America was absolute, like, for that to be in North America, because we were absolutely ravaged by glaciers. So it makes a lot of sense.